right, ladies and gentlemen, today I have with me Mr. Sledge, John Sledge, and he is an appraiser, been an appraiser for quite some time. He asked to come and get invited, and I get questions about appraisals all the time, and I have them personally. Like, it's one of those difficult things that the reason why these guys are here is because it's difficult, and we need to blame somebody else other than ourselves for what we missed. So we've got John with us. We're going to talk to appraisals, and John, my first question I have is 99.9% of the time, if I have ever ordered an appraisal, it's not been me. I've never ordered an appraisal. It's usually the banks or the lender or whatever and that kind of thing. Where do you find, like, why would our agents need to reach out and contact an appraiser such as yourself beyond through just the lending requirements?
Yeah, it happens occasionally, not often, and I appreciate you having me here. I actually I've retired as an appraiser. I'm a retired appraiser. Did that for 17 years. I've been investing for about the past 10, and I'm actually a mortgage loan officer as well. So I've kind of done everything in the arena, but what you guys do. And so occasionally an agent, when they have a really difficult property, whether it be a rural property or just very unique, they might want to hire an appraiser on the front end to help them get a value before listing the property. And it's not a typical need. So it's very rare occasion. So you're right. The majority of my work was, I would say 98% of my work was lender related. So worked for the lender, protecting the buyer and the lender to ensure that the value of the home was at or equal to what they were paying for the house. So yeah, there's an occasional need for it, but most of the time not.
Yeah. And so so you said you're also a loan officer, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking for my notepad. You're also a loan officer. So how did those two tie together? I mean, did you do it just because you're talking to enough people on that end of thing, or how did that come about?
When I left appraising 3 years ago, we were investing full time, and actually my first client, my first appraisal client, called me every 5 years. He was a client of mine for 15 years, and he'd call me every 5 years and say, "Hey, come to work for me." And no, it's all right. I'm doing fine. And this last 3 years we were talking, and it just, because I have so many connections with realtors and have just worked with so many different people over the years, that it just was a perfect fit for me to slide into the lending side. And the main reason is I prefer, like y'all, working with clients, and as an appraiser, you're locked in your office or out on a job site by yourself, and wanting to do something different where I actually was interacting with agents and clients on a regular basis. So that was kind of what took me from, and then I took my appraisal knowledge and understanding that part of the deal to help my clients have an easier process from start to finish on the lending side.
Yeah, I really want to dive into the appraisal knowledge on the investment side before we get to that, because I got a lot of questions about that one.
Yeah.
What kind of investing do you do?
We've renovated we've flipped about 12 homes in the last 5 years. So it was always a sideline of my appraisal business. And about half of those were homes we lived through, and the other half were ones that we bought and renovated and sold. And then we've had, I'm down to one rental property right now, but we've got one rental property. We've sold off 2 this past year. Just couldn't pass up pulling some equity out of those deals and moving it into cash for a little bit to see what we do next. So right now I'm not doing any renovations, but just managing that one rental property and doing my other businesses.
Well, I know a good property manager if you need one.
There you go.
So you said that you would take your appraisal knowledge going into this, and we've got a lot of investors. So I'm going to start there before I get into the appraisal side of things.
Sure.
But what kind of appraisal knowledge do you take in there? I mean, are you able to see certain trends ahead of the curve that we aren't?
No.
Well, let's start there.
Yeah, no. I mean, y'all typically are the ones that, have the expertise in the specific market as the agent. And I think the one thing I look differently at is being able to take the information and looking at how the appraiser is going to look at it. So whether it be from ensuring that, on their site visit, the first thing they do is go out and measure the house. So confirming that the size of the home is equal to what the appraiser is going to get it, because BCAT is historically not right most of the time, just because they're given the information. They don't ever go out and verify the information. It's given either through permits or, and homes, people that are
Original
going out.
construction. Yeah.
Yeah, and people that are going out and renovating older homes, even if they're doing an addition and pulling all their permits, that information doesn't typically make it to the county. So, or if you're going to turn around and sell that house, ensuring that you've got the right size is the first thing to make sure that what you start with is going to equal.
So first thing is size, but does matter.
Yeah,
got it.
It does. As a price per square foot business, that's critical. But then the other thing is looking at. So then they're going to look at quality and condition of the home, and there's ratings that the appraiser uses from 1 to 6 on each. From a quality standpoint, they're looking at your high end custom home, one of a kind is going to be a number 1, and a house that's almost fallen down is going to be a number 6. Your builder grade kind of mid-range is a 3 and a 4, and then you can have some high-end tract homes at the 2 and 3 end range, and then they're going to look at condition. So a brand new home is a 1, can never get to a 1 again after it's been lived in, even if you gut it and rebuild it. Unless you knock it down and start over, it can never be a 1 again. So down to 6, which is uninhabitable. So most homes again fall into a 3 and a 4, and they're going through and looking at, okay, what's the quality and condition, so that when they're comparing it, looking at their comparable sales, they're truly looking at, okay, this is apples to apples, or here's the different areas we have to make adjustments at, kind of across the board.
So let me back you up real quick, because I do want to get into that quality and condition conversation, because that's something I have a lot of issues with when it comes to fighting appraisers, especially on a home that I flipped that I did take a long way, but we're going to get to that in a second. But when it comes to the size, like, what do you think? So I know most of our agents, like coming out the gates when we're doing this, we say, hey, look, go to the county, find the square footage. Actually, usually the MLS pulls that data for us. So whenever we do list a house, we don't even have to think about it. It just pulls it or auto populates it. But I've always been trained, and I always train everybody, is in the agent comments to write, please verify room sizes and schools, right? Just because I don't want to get in trouble for that. And I do personally go out and measure each of the rooms, but I only measure them to 2 points, right? Just width and length, because that's all that MLS allows for. How would you recommend that an agent verifies a room? I mean, verifies or gets as close as they can. I mean, are we doing a length and width on the outside of the house? Should we go through and take our time to measure the whole damn thing? What's the best course of action you think that we should take as listing agents?
One course of action you can do is you can actually hire me, and I'll come out and measure it for you. I actually do have a home measurement business.
What do you charge for that? What do you charge for that?
So homes up to 4,000 square feet, I charge $300. Goes up a little bit between 4 and 6 and over 6,000, but I use the same standards as the appraiser does, and actually give you a sketch like you would get in an appraisal. And I can do the interior measurements for you as well. So your room sizes, I can knock those out, so you're not having to do it. But the main thing, the reason that you're taking your interior measurements doesn't correlate is the ANSI measurement standards, which are now actually a required standard across the industry and the appraisals. Requires an exterior measurement. So they're measuring the exterior of the home. They're taking out any areas that aren't heated and cooled, not finished out spaces. So pulling out a garage, pulling out porches and patios, making sure that if it's a 2-story house, if you got an open to below in your living room, know where it's 2-story there, that they're taking out any spaces that aren't considered part of the living area. And I think that's the biggest piece is, even if BCAD sends somebody out, or whatever county you're working in, to measure, they'll take the exterior measurements, but they're not going in the house. So they're not verifying what areas are air conditioned, heated, cooled, finished out, because to be considered part of the gross living area, there's 3 main things. One, all the rooms have to be accessible from the interior of the home. So if you do an addition on the back and it's more of a attached apartment and you can't access it from the home, then it's not considered gross living area. It'll get value as finished space. Or let's say you enclose a space above the garage and you have to go to the garage to go up some stairs to go to that space. It also wouldn't be considered part of the living space. It has to be heated and cooled similar to the rest of the house. So if you got ducted AC in all the house and you enclosed a porch and you shoved a window unit in there, it's not quite the same, or the finish out needs to be the same as the rest of the house. So those are the main things the appraiser looks at differently than, as far as how they can come up with the size of the home. But, and that's one of the main reasons why the county isn't correct a lot of the times is, one, they're going off what the original plans were. If there are any changes done, even though permits are filed, that information doesn't usually make it to the county. They take that first number and it kind of is what it is.
So I want to interrupt everybody on this, because this, to me, I'm seeing two applications for this personally, right? So as a listing agent, I'm going in there and I'm like, hey, look, I know the CAD says this is 900 square feet, but you've got 6 bedrooms. I was like, there's no way this is 900 square feet. You know what I mean? And that happens. I've run into that more often than you would think. But the second application that I'm seeing this for is also when it comes to like, so we're talking value, right? So the first one is, the size of your house, the value is going to be important, right?
Right.
So it's going to come from appraisals, getting out loans. What are we selling at? What are we renting it for? All that kind of stuff. But the other one I'm seeing it as is, to your point, is the CAD, the county appraisal district. They don't know your house. They're not allowed inside. They don't know what's going on. I actually spoke to one of them because I got in a big fight about my personal property. He's like, oh, your house has got a lot of roof faults, so therefore it's got to be nicer on the inside. And so we're charging you. I'm like, what the hell? No. We're not getting me on roof vaults. And that was one of their determining factors, because they can ascertain that from a satellite image, right?
Right.
And they can also, and it's the same way the roofers measure, if they're like, oh, it's going to be 22 squares, because they look at the satellite imaging and they measure it. So that's what a lot of these counties do. So if you're helping people, I would say this to my agents, like protest their taxes, and you happen to know that so much of it's square footage and it doesn't add up, that's a great way to actually pick it apart. It's like, hey, no, you're measuring my garage and it's not a livable area.
Right.
And so it's kind of an interesting one just to kind of think through this, guys, is when it comes to square footage, I've never known a square footage to be right.
No.
It's never right.
Well, you're right. And
it
is. And one of the major counties, they do, the software company that I use also does mass appraisals. And you're right, it takes the satellite image and it draws out the sketch from there. It takes off the overhangs a little bit, but it doesn't know what's a porch, what's a patio, what's your garage. Is there a second story? If so, is it, the same as the lower floor? So for them, an estimate is close enough, because all they want is how much taxes they can get out of you. And from a value standpoint, the reason I started the measurement company right when I retired was 2 reasons. One, when I looked at deals that blew up or I couldn't make value on, it was because a lot of the time it was because the house was actually smaller than what the county had it in and what it was listed at. So then it didn't make value because it wasn't big enough. The other thing that the listing agent and the seller never see is, if the house is actually bigger than what the county is, you're leaving cash on the table, because the buyer's getting their appraisal back. Oh, it's bigger. It's 100 extra square feet. That's $20,000. And I just won. Stick that in your pocket and move on. They close the loan and they go on. And the seller never knows that they left an extra 20 grand on the table. So
how many appraisers, in your opinion, do you think might be lazy about that and just use the CAD data?
Very few. I mean,
very few.
They'll lose their license.
That's always been a question of mine, is how many of them are, because I know my father's an appraiser, but he's up in Minnesota. So, and he's been doing it for, whatever it is, 300-400 years. And he, he's always real meticulous about measuring it. But I've always felt like some of these guys, I'm like, how did you measure that? Like, you were there for 45 minutes. There's no way, like, you got all that stuff done. But
it can be done.
Some of them do. Some of them do, yeah.
And it's, I mean, is everybody measuring? No, I'm not going to say everybody, but I mean, they put their license on the line if they don't. So, and
gotcha. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the main reason I started that company, was there was such a need, that I just felt like, and people don't understand that. The way that business is done is you pull it off the CAD or a previous MLS, and that's just how business is done. And so it kind of became my mission to teach people on why it's so important and why it's not always reliable.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go back to the quality and conditions point where we were talking about that. So as we're going through this, so quality, you said it earlier, it's like, do we have marble floors or do we have, 38-cent tile? Do we have, whatever, right? So that's going to be the quality. And the condition you had mentioned is new.
Right.
right? Like the newness, like the condition, like this is as new as it's going to get, right? So we talked about that. My question is going to obviously as a flipper sometimes, and rentals and stuff like that. What are some of the things that you look for in the quality of a property? When it, like, how can I get that from a 3 to a 2 or from a 4 to a 3, in your opinion, right? Because it's going to be different. And this is, I always catch myself. That's when I'm arguing with guys. Like if
Right.
I go through and I do a flip, and I'm like, they're like, oh, we gave you a 4 condition. I'm like, there's no way in hell. That's a $4,000 chandelier. That's, you know what I mean? I'm like, there's no way this thing should be a 4 when it comes to, well, it's the neighborhood. I'm like, I don't care about the neighborhood. I care about this house because I
Right.
did, I may have gone as high as I thought I could for that, which, is also dangerous. You can always overbuild for the neighborhood. Um, but my question is like, what are some good sticking points that we might be able to contest with an appraiser about when it comes to the quality of the objects in the property,
So
or the fixtures rather?
yeah, so let's start, and then I'll get more into that. But I think one of the main keys, and I deal with this with agents all the time, but especially when y'all are the investors and doing the flips as well as selling it, is
It
making
gets
sure.
personal.
Yeah,
It's a little
well, and then
personal.
making sure that the appraiser knows upfront what it is you've done. So a specific list of all the renovations, because like you said, an appraiser's in the house for 45 minutes. They're measuring for about 20 minutes of that, 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the size of the home. And then they're going through and they're looking. Well, some of the stuff they can't see, from just walking room to room. So I recommend a couple of things. One, you have a detailed list of all the renovations that were done. Any items that are specifically upgraded items that aren't typical, listing those out and in a budget.
Yeah, I was going to say, you answered my question. I was going to say, hey, would it behoove us to provide the actual cost? Like, hey, I bought that faucet and that's $1,000 faucet. Don't tell me this is a Q4.
Right. So because one, you're right, it should help the quality of the home. And so, yeah, I would list everything out. And then when you're coming up with your list price and you're looking at your comparable sales, if you'll give them a synopsis of why you chose the sales, what your rationale is based on, what the updates are in this home. Because what I found as an appraiser is I would go and the listing agent would leave me a folder full of MLS sheets. Well, and nothing else. Half the time it wasn't even a CMA in there. It was just here's the sheets of all the sales in the neighborhood. Well, good. I'm gonna have to go pull those myself. So I'll save some printer ink and use the ones I decide to choose. But I think what really the people that made an impact on me would be ones that would tell me their rationale. That means they put more thought process into it than just, here, I'm going to print out everything that's sold in the last 6 months in this neighborhood. Here's what I used. Here's why I used. Here's how I got to this list price. Now, are they going to agree with you exactly? No, but if you give them your rationale and your thought process up front, they're more likely to take that into consideration, because it's much easier to win them over before than to win them over after they've already come up with a value. Very rarely I did, but most appraisers, when you're trying to fight something, unless they've made a mistake, are less likely to go back and look at different comparable sales just because.
In my experience, yes, that I 100% agree with you. And I will say to everybody who's listening to this at a later date, it's so frustrating. And sorry, John, take this with a grain of salt. 90% of appraisers become cantankerous a-holes after they've completed the report. Okay. Once they've completed that report, they do not want to have to go back and redo this thing again. They're just like us. They've got 78 more clients to go see. The last thing they want to do is go back and relook at their homework that they spent God knows how long working on. Right. So I have found that, you got to butter them up first before you put them in the pan. You know what I mean? You got to butter them up. And I do go all that. So, and also for everybody who's listening, is if we said earlier, you can overbuild for a neighborhood just because one house sold for $1 bajillion in that neighborhood and everything else sold for $200,000, the appraiser is going to throw that $1 bajillion house out. Like, you cannot use that one. I mean, it's an anomaly and they tend to throw it out. Now, you might be able to reference it, but more than likely it's not going to be, well, this one sold for $700,000, therefore mine should. It's like, no, the average sales price in a neighborhood. So you got to be careful when you're flipping to make sure you don't do that.
Right. And that's a great point. And the other piece to the overbuilt for the neighborhood is when you're looking at your quality or your expanding the footprint. Look at your comparable sales, because yeah, do you want to be on the higher end of the market? Yeah, but you don't want to be that outlier, because even if you got a buyer at $700,000, the appraiser is going to look at it like, well, yeah, but everything else in here is selling for 4 or whatever it is. So, I mean, if everything in there has level 1 granite, don't go put marble in your house, or, you know, countertops in your house, or take it up. The way I always look at it is, okay, here's the range in this neighborhood. I want to be up here, and I want to compete with those top homes. I don't want to be the one out here that spent too much money on the front end and I can't get it out on the back end, because then you're spending money that doesn't add dollar for dollar in the value.
And I think most agents need to really understand, like, looking at the house from the appraiser's point of view as well, because a lot of people are missing. They're like, I don't, they honestly, appraisers don't care. I bought this house for 200 and I dropped 300 into it, therefore it's worth at least 5. No, they don't care. They do not care. Okay, like, I'm just letting you know that. Yeah, I've tried that 1,000 times.
Right.
It's fallen on deaf ears 1,000 times.
It's good information for them to have, but they're not going to come up with their value based on that.
And that's so, but when you're looking at it from the appraiser's point of view, you have to realize, just like I tell everybody, like all the agents, when it comes to realtor stuff, cover your ass, cover your ass, cover your ass, right? You make one person mad, they're going to come back, try and sue you, try and get the E&O insurance, try and do something to you to get out of something that they made a bad decision on. So that's why all that stuff, the CMA, the Exhibit Alpha, which, you know, I mean, the CMA, the Exhibit Alpha, the IABS, all that stuff is very, very important, because it shows that you put forth the effort and did your job. These guys have the exact same problem.
Exactly.
And the problem is if they screw up on evaluation, yeah, they're going to piss you off in the short term, right? You're going to be upset because, oh, it's 15,000 below and now we got to go renegotiate. You're upset about the 15 grand. I don't think you understand how mad a bank will be if somebody defaults on a $400,000 house that's only worth 250. So now you got a bank with a whole army of lawyers coming after the appraiser because you said it was this amount, right? So you can't, they're not going to bend, because the dragon is way worse on the other end than it is dealing with you. So make sure you take all that stuff into account. And to this point, butter them before you put them in the oven, because if you provide all the information, all that stuff, they're going to be able to work faster. They're going to appreciate it. And they're going to be a lot more likely to listen to you. If you have done nothing to help, then they're not going to help you. It's the way the world works, right? I mean, the left hand washes the right hand.
Right.
So make sure you're working on all that stuff. My next question for you, John, is where do you see that most agents screw up, either with creating a CMA or pricing a property, or even on the investor side, like anticipating an ARV? Where do you see that we miss the majority of the times?
Well, you look at a market like, let's talk about a listing agent right now. The market we're just coming out of, everybody was just throwing cash at deals. There weren't enough properties on the market. And so, it's like, oh, here, we're going to throw cash at this deal because we want to have this house. And it was funny because when we were in the heat of it, I was in a Q&A one day, and this agent asked me, what do you think is going to slow this market down? And I said, well, so right now you're listing at market value, and then you're getting 10 offers that first day, and you're getting an extra 20 grand. I said, well, when you begin to list at that 20 grand overprice rather than what market value is, then that house is going to sit on the market, and your days on market increase, and that house has a problem according to the buyer, and it's going to sit there while everything else is getting 20 grand over. So
right.
I think part of it was the interest rates shifted up, and that caused a little bit of a slowdown. But the other is that people weren't looking at their listings as they always have, which is, what is the value of this home? What is a good list price? They were looking at, well, everybody's getting 20 grand over, so that I want to, because that's what the seller's telling you. Well, if it's worth this and everybody's getting 20 grand over, I want you to list it for this. Well, so a lot of agents that I see aren't confident enough to tell their seller, yeah, I get that this is what you want, this is what it's worth. And so finding a good list price, because there's two things. You got to make there's two things you got to do. You got to make market value for the appraiser for the deal to go through, but you have to list it at a price that's marketable. I mean, if you're over the market, then, then you're dealing with days on markets. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is trying to appease their client rather than, because what the seller really wants, they want you to sell it fast and get the most amount of money you can get out of it. And if you're overpriced, neither one of those is gonna happen from what I've seen.
I brought that same conversation up with somebody the other day. I was like, for the longest time, we were listing $300,000 houses for 300 grand. We were getting 350 for them.
Yeah.
And then everybody, now we're all listing them for 315, 325, hoping for the same outcome, and it's not happening. And I blame mostly interest rates, but now everybody sees all these price reductions. I was like, you're just reducing it back down to 300. That's all that I'm seeing. I haven't seen anybody go, never mind, sell it for 200. I haven't seen that yet. I've just seen everybody kind of going, we're getting rid of the greed and getting back to a more believable price point.
And I think that's what we're going to see in San Antonio, especially. I mean, we've got so many people coming into town that we're not going to see, your buyers, and this is another problem, are listening to the national news, and
which is terrifying.
Has nothing to do with our market. Yeah, we're not living in a bubble. I don't believe the country as a whole is in a real estate bubble. It's not 2008 again. It's what we're seeing is people were greedy, and there were not enough homes on the market. So therefore, buyers were willing to pay whatever. One, rates went up, and your buyer can't afford the same house they could afford 6 months ago. They just can't. And two, so what's going to happen is, you're right, the greed's going to go away in San Antonio. Will it come back and level out for a little bit? Yeah. Will days on market go up a little bit? Yeah, I think so. Especially if we get more inventory. If not, then they're going to continue to sell fast. You're just not going to have that extra, greed factor or the extra cash over the market value. So I think even when we're in those crazy markets, if you're listing your homes for what you see the market value is, then, or what the market is willing to bear, then I think it really it's one of the biggest, I think, issues that are out there. On the investment side, it's really looking at each of the sales that have sold, all your comparable sales out there, and looking at what it is they're putting in those homes. So from what type of countertops, or is it level 1 granite? Are they using a higher end? Are all the bathrooms in the kitchen updated? Some of the neighborhoods, you're seeing the bathroom and the master bath and the kitchen updated, and then the second and third bathrooms, might get a little freshen up, but it's not. Making sure that you're not overbuilding for that area, because once you do that, then you're not going to get out from a dollar to dollar standpoint. And what I always found is, if you can add square footage, that's where the real money is. I mean, because you're adding, that's where you're really making the extra cash. But looking at it, at what you're doing, and is your cost going to drive additional value? Because let's say a swimming pool, for example. I know most of us renovate homes don't add swimming pools, but people all the time are, oh my God, I put this $150,000 pool in, which today would cost $300,000. But it's like, oh, so that adds $150,000 to my value. And I said, well, or no, they asked me, should I put a pool in, $150,000 pool? I said, well, I don't know. Do you like to swim? Because don't put it in there because you want to add value, $150,000 in value to your house, because you're not going to do it. But it's also not a set dollar amount of pools get whatever there are. Because I know years ago when I started in this business, people would say, oh, this pool is $20,000 and in that neighborhood is $30,000 or $5,000. They're literally going into that market area, looking at the comparable sales and saying, these two houses are the same, except one has a pool and one doesn't. This one sold for $30,000 more than the one without the pool. So therefore that pool brings $30,000 in value. I had an agent call me last week and said, I'm doing what you told me to do, and the house with the pool sold for less than the other houses in the area. Well, they're in a market where people don't want a damn pool in their yard.
Yeah, and people ask me that during the pandemic. There's so many people buying pools, and the price. And I know a couple of guys that do 2 or 3. I own pool stores, and they were putting it all in, and they were telling me they were doing 2 and 3 times multipliers of what they would normally charge for a pool because they were so backed up and busy.
Yeah,
and And then I had a lot of friends call and ask me that same thing. And it's so fun. I said the same thing. It's like, do you like to swim? They're like, what? And I'm like, I was like, it could add nothing. It could, I said, a good hip shot is whatever you pay for it at about half of that value. I said,
Yeah.
but after that, I mean, it could be zero. It could be 200%. I don't
Yeah.
know. And
it truly is at that time and neighborhood to neighborhood as to what it drives. And that's how they're supposed to look at everything, every line on there, whether it be the quality, the condition, pools, guest house, anything, bedrooms.
You can do the same thing with square footage too.
Yeah.
I had one guy that was building this house. He got about halfway through it and then he was throwing in the towel and he wanted me to come by, and he was building this. I mean, I swear to God, it's 7,000 square foot house where the neighbors, both sides, were 1,500. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to put the money I need to into this thing and get it out. There was no way. And I think he realized that too. So, it's kind of funny. So you're saying the best bet is add square footage if you can, and then do your best on the quality to match the higher upper end. If we're looking at it from investors, right?
Yeah.
And then fix what we can on the conditional side, like make sure the roof's in good condition, AC, all that kind of stuff. Right. Yep. Making sure that it's in good working condition is the best way to do it. But square footage to a point is the magic.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to overbuild for the neighborhood, just like we talked about before. But if you can, we finished one last year where we added, it was a 2-2, and we added a third bedroom and enlarged the master bath. And, that the cost that we put into it, I mean, the multiplier there was substantial, but you don't want to overbuild. Exactly. I mean, especially not something like that where you're that much out of the market, because then the people that are looking at that house are going to look around and go, hey, I don't want to live here. I mean,
yeah. And I was going to say, and then the old adage, I mean, I've always been taught it. I know I've said it probably more than I should. Bathrooms and kitchens. Is that where we're going to add the most value?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how much thought do you put into this is SPC flooring versus luxury vinyl versus, BS $2 stuff? Where do you add any value to that? Do you care? Do you notice? Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I do, because, I worked both sides of it. So I think I looked at things a little bit differently, but they're really looking at and again, here's the difficult part from the appraiser standpoint is they're doing a site visit and you're giving them information about your property. Then they're going in and looking at MLS sheets and trying to figure out from photos and what the agent wrote on the MLS, what that house, what truly that quality and condition of the house. That's a struggle. I mean, there's not a good answer for what makes that better for the appraiser. Unless you as an agent have, one of these higher end homes that sold, and you walk that house and that you're very similar on quality and condition using similar items. That's another thing when you're putting your CMA together and you're giving your packet to your appraiser, is saying, hey, I walked this property that sold for this, and they use very similar materials on their renovations that our property did. And therefore you're giving them a leg up to say, okay, so this really is the barometer. This is kind of the mark that we look at. And then they can go in, if your high-end home is really, an outlier, then they're going to drop the outliers on both ends and look at what's most similar. But if you have something that's very similar, then they're going to take that one. And if it's sold for more than the other ones, then they can adjust the other ones up from a quality or a condition standpoint to meet that. So if you know that this house here is the best comparable sales and here's why it is, then you share that information and that helps them know what from a quality and condition standpoint. But as far as, that's why you would give them the list of everything you've done and what type of materials and what it costs. And then they're going to go in and try to find the best comparable homes and then make adjustments. But again, you're not going to always get dollar for dollar on some of the higher end. So it really depends on that neighborhood at that point in time. What are other people doing and then build up to the higher end of what's being used and not, can you do some things that'll set yourself apart? Yeah, as long as you're not overspending on those. But it definitely makes sense from a marketability standpoint. If you have some things that people go, wow, that's really cool, and drives them in, and you're not overspending on it, it might not add from a dollar to dollar standpoint on value, but because you got to find a balancing act there.
I've got to interrupt you. I'm sorry, because I've said that 1,000 times to so many people, and it's an interesting fight that Jessica, my general contractor, and we get into all the time when it comes to flips and stuff. Is what is the value of sodding the front yard? It's going to cost me $5,000 to do it. Does it add $5,000 worth of value? No, it does not. It's like, I'm telling guy, for those of y'all listening to the appraiser, he's got like one little box. I've seen the form that it's like landscaping check. You know what I mean? It's not even like, oh, I could tell that he has, Kentucky bent bluegrass, and nobody cares. Okay, they don't care. What does matter is that curb appeal. Are you going to be able to sell that house better because there's grass and not dirt? That's my consideration, not necessarily the value. And then you're also going to want to take that to the next level. Is like, well, what if I'm doing a rental, right? It's like, well, if I'm doing a rental, I'm probably not, like, I just finished up one I'm getting refinanced the other day, and
right.
I got to go out there and I'm going to put some grass seed down and water it so I can get a little bit of grass, but I'm not spending $4,000 to sod it because I know my renter's just going to let it die. Right. So that, like, I'm not throwing out $4,000 because it's such a small, minute thing to the appraiser, which I need to get this thing refinanced. So that I'm just worried about getting that done. So my point, I guess, just to echo yours, is just be careful what you're spending your money on. These guys he said it already, guys. He's looking for square footage. He's looking for quality and condition. And he's, you know what I mean? Kitchens and bathrooms, make sure, and don't overdo it. You can't put marble in, on the south side. It's not going to help you. It's, you're just going to have a really nice rental. Now, granted, I put granite in all of mine, but I got this guy that'll do level 1 granite for dirt cheap. So
I got one.
Keeps it keeps it
doesn't
simple
make
for
sense
me
not to do it. I mean,
exactly. It's the same price as putting in Formica, and it doesn't stain. So I'm happy.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest confusions is that, there's market value, which is what the appraiser look at, and there's marketability. And like you just said, landscaping is something I talk about all the time, because people are like, oh, well, we put in this tree and all these bushes and this, and we sodded the yard, and that's great, and that will add curb appeal, which is what you need for your marketability. It doesn't correlate to market value. It doesn't. Now, if your yard has nothing in the front, no grass, no plants, no nothing, and every other comparable sales, is landscaped, well, then there could be some value there. But it really is, you got to match the neighborhood, and what you really want to do from a landscaping standpoint is drive traffic, and it's, because you're right, it's just a minute portion of the.
Yeah. I mean, he made it well. Find the ugliest house in the prettiest neighborhood and make it look like the other ones. That's all you got to do. You know what I mean? It's not about chip and join gains. Like, I'm not making this one house for this one person and it's going to be perfect and they'll pay whatever I put. That's not how it works, guys. It's just not. Now, but with that being said, now this is a question I like to talk to appraisers about. And I think I have an answer, which I really don't. I'd be curious to hear your answer. If I correct me if I'm wrong, 90% of residential home sales are valued using a comparable sales approach. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so guys, for those of y'all that don't know, I think there's 3 or technically 4 ways that you can value a property: comparable sales, build cost, like what is it, replacement value, right? There's the business one, how much income does it generate, and the fourth one I can't think of right. There's another way to do it, but
those are the main 3.
Yeah, so those are the main 3. But when you're doing a residential house, it's always comparable sales. What is anything else nearby sold for? That 99. And now if you have this one house that's built in the middle of the Mojave Desert, yeah, you might do something like replacement value or something like that. The business, like how much the income approach is based, that's usually multifamily or commercial businesses. That's completely different as well. So my question to you is if we have to use the comparable approach constantly, how do we account for any kind of rise in home values? Like if that house sold for 200, then this one should sell for 200, and they should always sell for 200 because nobody's willing to pay the extra. I mean, is it only driven by people that are willing to pay the 20,000 cash above it? Do you take into account, hey, I've noticed like last year in San Antonio, what do we have, like a 13%, home increase on the year? It's like, do you take that into account? It's like, well, the nearest comp I could find was a year ago and it's dead on. Let's just pretend it's a perfect comp and it sold a year ago. So I'm going to add 13%. I mean, do you do that? Do you account for it? how does that work?
So
And how hard can we push it as agents?
the requirement for any adjustment they make is they have to be able to justify it by a comparable sale. So one, if you're in a neighborhood and there hadn't been a sale, I mean, this past year is a perfect example. The appraiser's always playing catch up to that market because it's skyrocketing so fast. Yeah, if something closes, before they do their site visit, then on the higher end, then you're good to go. If you have 10 pending sales and nothing's closed at that higher value, it's the appraiser's got to be able to justify it. Now, with that said, if they can find one sale at the higher value or that shows the trend, then they can do time adjustments on other sales because they have to have at least 3 sales, sometimes 5, depending on the bank. But if they can find one comparable sale that's sold at this new value, and then they've got sales that are 90 days or 6 months or even a year out, then they can look at what the trend has been and they can adjust those other ones up with a time adjustment. Now, so it takes us to, you're in a specific neighborhood. That's where they're going to start. They're going to start in the neighborhood. They're going to start in the last 90 days. If there's no sales, then they're going to expand out time first, and then they're going to expand out areas. So the lender prefers that they stay within a year and really within 6 months. They'll let them go up to a year and within a mile. Now, if there's still not something that really is, you don't have any newer sales in 6 months and it's a really volatile market, then they're going to go outside that neighborhood. They're going to expand out and find, okay, this subdivision over here is comparable to the one we're in, and there is a more recent sale, and they just got to verify, they've got to prove that homes selling over there are comparable to ones selling here. Then they can take that newer sale from there, make whatever adjustments they need to make, and then they can make time adjustments there as well. So they do have to have a sale to justify any adjustments they made. Even if the market shows that, they've got to be able to substantiate it with a comparable sale. And you're right, there are the cost approach and the income approach. They'll be utilized to support the value that would come up with the comparable sales. But even so, residential includes a 1 unit up to 4 is what a residential appraisal will do. And those up to that point are still based on comparable sales. Once you get over 4 units, then you're in a commercial property, a small apartment or above. That is when the income approach really, and those are more based on income approach than on the comparable sales. But 1 to 4 units typically is more based on what sales are out there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's always the joke, right? It's like, if we got to have comps, then it's like the market would never move. So somebody's got to show the money, right?
Right.
That's what we're getting at.
Yep.
Man, so you always tell everybody I'll let them out by 12:30, and I have a meeting today too. And I had one thing I really wanted you to do, and I don't know if we're going to have time, but to show me. But before we go any further, so one of the things that I'm hoping to utilize you for is kind of this desktop appraisal, or, hey, I need you to measure, or like, I'm just way off on this, or what do you charge for desktop appraisals? And little things like, for example, I've got 10 acres that I'm looking at buying it's a long story, but I think the valuation of that, if I were to buy it and just turn it into commercial, right, just rezone the stupid thing and then try and sell it, what would you charge for helping people determine those kind of things, or to do kind of a desktop, like, maybe a drive-by appraisal kind of deal? Or do you even consider those?
Yeah,
because we're not using them for lending.
Yes. Well, I mean, I would if I hadn't retired I don't carry an appraiser's license anymore. When I retired, I let my license go. So I can't do valuation. What I do, and it's a free service I do, is if somebody's working on a CMA or trying to come up with a value and they want me to review the comparable sales and look at, what areas the appraiser is going to look at and where I think, are you on the right track? Does this make a bigger impact than what you're looking at? Or, I'm not sure what you're looking at. You're so far above where the market is. I'm happy to offer that as a free service to your agents, and the other thing I do is let them call me or text me and ask appraisal questions. So I don't charge for that, but I don't deliver an appraisal. So if you do I've got some appraisers that I work with that are here locally. And if you do need a desktop appraisal done or something like that, I've got some people that can actually give you a valuation. But I'm happy to use my knowledge and help you make sure that you're on the right track. And so I don't charge for that, though. That's just a way for me to build relationships to move my other businesses forward.
And your other businesses. So how can we help support you?
Well, you know, if you need a home measured and want to make sure that what you're listing is going to equal the appraisers, you know, I do have my measurement business, and then I am a residential lender. So we loan on, I mean, any residential properties, 1 to 4 units. We do all the standard conventional FHA, USDA, VA. If you have any veteran buyers, we don't charge a origination fee on VA loans. So it saves them about $1,295 in closing costs. So just something we do for the veterans. But you know, I'm happy to pre-qualify any buyers that you guys have, or verify size on homes. And that's really what I do is I'm trying to get the word out about how important it is to make sure that the size of the home is accurate. And so those are some of the things I do, and I'd be happy to send you all my information when I get off there.
Yeah, no, by all means, because when I post this video, I'm going to have all that with it. But guys, I think it's funny that he's stressing so much. So I mean, you always see fill a need, right? Find a need, fill a need, and it sounds like the need that he kept seeing and where he saw the world falling apart is nobody knew how big their damn house was, and so that's really intriguing to me personally, because now I'm starting to get a little bit scared about a few things. I'm like, hold on a minute, wait a minute, because like I've got a sixplex I was talking to you about before we started recording that I've ripped the whole backside off, and the reason why is they put an extension on it for the kitchen and all this stuff. Right. And that's where, right. So we're rebuilding that entire extension. But now I'm thinking to myself, it's like, did anybody ever measure that? I mean, granted, it's probably, I don't know, 100 square feet tops, but it's 100 square feet. If I could sell this thing for 300 square foot, you know, it's $3,000 or 30 grand. Sorry, 30 grand. Yeah.
And that's the part that people don't think about. Well, it's only 100 square feet. Well, yeah. Is that 15 grand, 20 grand, 30 grand? Depends on what your price per square foot is. And, you know, we're in a price per square foot business. And if we don't know how big of the house we're selling is, you know.
And I think I was going to say, and we're what, $300 plus, whatever, you know, I think it might be worth making a phone call, you know, $300, make 300 or 30 grand. Might be worth it.
It'll be the cheapest thing. It doesn't seem cheap up front, but you know, your return on your investment, you know, and do I guarantee it's going to be bigger? No, but you know, you have peace of mind going into the deal, because that's one of the things it's like, okay, we're praying to the appraisal gods, please come, please let us make value. And you know, what can I do to help you to make sure that is a little less stressful on the back end? So,
you know, John, I might ask you back one more time, because I would really like, I've done a handful of videos on doing CMAs and doing those kind of things. And like I told you earlier, like I'll send you this one property just if you are bored. But you know, since we've been talking about appraisals, like I might, if it's all right with you, I might call you back and see if we can get you on to do like a CMA with me and kind of walk us through what that looks like and the best way to make the adjustments and do those. Because, you know, for those of y'all that are listening that don't know this, if you have a listing appointment, you need to provide a CMA. You cannot just say, I think we should list this house for X. You cannot think, you must prove, just like all the other appraisers, right? You got to be able to say, hey, look, I looked at your neighborhood, I looked at all this, here's where I think it's at. And if you do a CMA correctly, those printouts, both in Central Texas, the Matrix MLS, and whatever Sabre uses, they're really impressive documents. I mean, they're amazing selling features. Like when you go in and you want to seem like a professional, if you walk in on your selling appointment with a CMA, at least a rough one, that's a great place to start. It's a good selling tactic, good selling tool.
No, I agree, because then you're avoiding that seller that thinks that their house is worth this and they want to sell it for this. Because if you can show them, just like when you give it to the appraiser, you're showing them your rationale. The appraiser you want to meet up here, and the seller you want to kind of rein them in a little bit usually, and it's key. And I'd love to come back. Hey, let me tell you one other thing before we hang up is, you know, so you're getting your packet ready for your appraiser. When you're showing a house, you always make sure that the lights are on, it looks great, it's clean, it smells good. But when the appraiser comes, usually they go in with their super key, that all the lights are off. I can tell you, if there's enough light coming in, the appraiser's not even gonna turn on the lights. They're gonna wander through. And while they're supposed to be this third party that looks at everything very analytically, there's a psychological piece to, my wife does all my marketing, and she's like, so she was picking my brain. She's like, well, why, what is there psychological? I'm like, it's not psychological. It's very, it's very analytical. And she's like, no, that's not true. So I walked through it, and if a house is lit up like it's ready for a showing, it automatically puts this cycle, oh, it's a nicer home than the house you walk into and it's dark and dirty or whatever it is. So
I think the
anytime you got an
smell,
appraiser
right?
coming, anytime you got an appraiser coming, and I get they come at the end, and a lot of people are moving at that point, even if it's just lights and clean, even if there's boxes there, it makes a difference psychologically. So when they're looking at the pictures online, they're thinking, oh yeah, that house looked like this. Not like, it was a little more dingy than that, just because they never turned on the lights. And I didn't even realize it. My wife made me kind of come through with that. So that's something I always like to share with people.
Oh, it's so funny because I do the thing on the opposite end. It's like if I printed out, right here, I've got a whole drops in, but I got a whole stack of MLS stuff I'm going to go look at today. And it's so funny. The ones that smell like cat pee are the ones I want the most.
Well, yeah,
because I know nobody else is going to like it. I know I can beat them up on price. I know I can, take care of all that. And, so I know I can fix it. Most people won't do it, but it makes perfect sense. If you flip it, it's like, is this house worth a lot?
Because it won't be like that when you sell it.
Does it smell like vanilla body spray? You know what I mean? It's like, well, you got to figure that out. So it's pretty funny. I like that. I like that idea because there is a lot of psychology that goes into it. And take that, guys. That's a good little nugget.
There you go. But yeah, let's set up another time and we'll walk through a CMA and see, kind of get you the appraiser's view of it. Yeah, for sure. And then I'd love to, like I said, I might make you do that one that I've got new Bromfels that it's perplexing. It's driving me crazy. But yeah, we'll see if I still, let's see how good I am. All right, John. Well, I appreciate your time. I'm going to put your name and number. I got your number, your email. I got everything. So I'm going to put that up there. Guys, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been texting John back and forth, and he's extremely responsive. He's quick to do things. He's really chill because I've been in slam this week, and he just texted me like an hour before, and he's like, hey, do I get a link or something? I was like, I got you. So he's pretty chill. He's easy to talk to. So I'd invite you to reach out to him. Yeah, you got specific questions or something you want me to look at, just send me a text, give me a call. And if you want to talk over that other one, just call me and we'll walk through it. Yeah, for sure. It's going to depend on whether or not I end up buying it. If I sell it to somebody else, I won't care. But if I end up buying it, I'm really going to want to make sure I know that one. Sounds good. Well, cool, John. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thanks. You too. Thanks. Bye.